The smell of dried blood and old infection is a smell you never forget. It gets into your uniform, your hair, the very lines of your hands. In the spring of 1945, in a bombed out hospital in Berlin, that smell was the air we breathed. We were a forward evacuation hospital, a collection of tents and crumbling buildings that had once been a prestigious German medical institute. Our job was simple: patch up our boys so they could be sent back to the front, or stabilized enough to be shipped further west. We were a revolving door of American youth, chewed up and spat out by the final, vicious throes of the war. I thought I had seen every corner of this shattered place. I'd helped in the operating theaters, their floors permanently stained a dark rust. I'd doled out rations in the makeshift mess, and I'd even helped clear rubble from a collapsed wing. But I was wrong. The hospital held a secret I stumbled upon on a rain-slicked April evening, a secret that would change everything I thought I knew about this war, about the enemy, and about the fragile, stubborn light of humanity that flickers even in the deepest darkness. It started with a missing blanket, a simple gray army issue blanket. One of my patients, a young kid from Ohio with a fever that wouldn't break, was shivering. I knew we had a small stash of extras in a storage closet on the second floor of the main building, a part of the hospital we rarely used because the ceiling was unstable. So I went, my footsteps echoing in the hollow, empty corridors. The electricity was out in that section as usual, and the only light came from the fading dusk through the grime-caked windows. I found the closet, the lock already broken, and pushed the door open. It was mostly empty, just a few broken bed frames. But as I turned to leave, disappointed, my shoulder brushed against a shelf. It swung inward. Not a shelf, a door. A cleverly concealed door, painted to look exactly like the wall around it. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, frantic drumbeat in the silent hallway. Was it a German supply room? An officer's hideout? My training screamed at me to get back, to find an MP, but a deeper, more curious instinct took over. I pushed the door open wider. It revealed not a room, but a narrow, dark staircase leading down. And from below, I heard it. Not the moans of pain I was used to, but the soft, hushed sound of a voice speaking in German, and then the clear, unmistakable scent of antiseptic and soup. A hidden ward, right under our feet. My name is Eleanor Shepard. Captain Eleanor Shepard, United States Army Nurse Corps, though the rank feels a bit silly sometimes when most of my day is spent emptying bedpans and writing letters. Home for boys who can't hold a pen. I'm from a small town in Vermont, a place of green mountains and quiet lakes. I joined up after Pearl Harbor, like so many others, fueled by a mix of patriotism and a desperate desire to do something, anything other than watch the newsreels. I trained at Walter Reed, shipped out to England in '43, and followed the front lines across France and into Germany. I've seen things I can't unsee. I've held the hands of boys as they took their last breath, their minds 1,000 miles away in Kansas or Georgia. Berlin in April 1945 was a nightmare painted in shades of gray and red. The buildings were skeletons, picked clean by bombs and artillery. The air was thick with the dust of pulverized brick and the lingering, acrid smell of cordite and smoke. The sounds were a constant, discordant symphony, the distant crump of shelling, the rumble of our own tanks rolling through the streets, the frantic shouts of soldiers, and the ceaseless, low wail of the wounded. Our hospital was chaos incarnate. We were overflowing. G is with every imaginable injury filled every cot, every hallway, every available space on the floor. We worked 18, 20-hour shifts, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. We were tired, bone-tired, soul-tired. And through it all, there was the official line: we were here for our men. The German civilians were to be processed, their medical needs a secondary concern handled by their own collapsing systems. Enemy soldiers, the Wehrmacht, and especially the SS, were to be secured as posts, their medical treatment minimal, just enough to keep them alive for interrogation. It was a clear, simple, black and white order. Use versus them. It was a mindset you had to adopt, I think, just to survive the emotional toll. If you started seeing the enemy as people, as fathers and sons, it would break you. So we built walls, not just of rubble, but inside our own hearts. But that hidden door, that secret staircase, threatened to tear down every single one of my walls. Standing there at the top of those dark steps, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp Berlin air. This was forbiddance. This was a direct violation of orders. What was down there? An enemy command post? A stash of weapons? The logical part of me, the soldier part, said to report it immediately. But the nurse in me, the part that had sworn an oath to preserve life, was captivated by that smell of antiseptic. It was the smell of my purpose. I made a decision, one that would define the rest of my life. I took a step down, then another. I descended into the secret. The staircase was narrow and steep. The stone steps weren't smooth in the middle from generations of use. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of the busy hospital above faded away, replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the scuff of my boots and the frantic beating of my own heart. About halfway down, a single bare electric bulb hung from a wire, casting a weak yellow pool of light. Someone had rigged power down here. This was no forgotten cellar. At the bottom of the stairs was another door, this one heavy, dark wood, slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, the old hinges groaning a soft protest. The sight that met my eyes made me freeze, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. It was a ward. A long, low-ceilinged chamber, lit by a few more of those bare bulbs. It was clean, remarkably so compared to the filth and chaos upstairs. The air, while carrying the familiar hospital sense of iodine and sickness, also held a faint, sweet smell of wood smoke and something cooking. And it was full. About 24 iron-framed beds stood in neat rows. In them were men, women, and a few elderly people. But it was the occupants of the beds nearest to me that made my blood run cold. They were wearing the tattered, gray uniforms of the German Wehrmacht. Some were boys, no older than the privates I treated upstairs. One had his head wrapped in thick bandages, another had his legs suspended in a traction device. My eyes scanned the room, my training kicking in, assessing threats. And then I saw her. She was an older woman, perhaps in her late 50s, her hair pulled back in a severe gray bun. She wore a clean but well-worn civilian dress under a starched white apron. She was leaning over a patient, gently adjusting a pillow under his head, speaking to him in low, soothing German. She had a presence about her, a quiet authority. She must have sensed me because she looked up. Her eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, locked with mine. There was no surprise in them, no fear. Just a calm, weary assessment. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were the soft crackle from a small iron stove in the corner and the labored breathing of a patient. I finally found my voice, though it came out as a whisper. "Who are you? What is this place?" She straightened up, wiping her hands on her apron. She replied in English, with a heavy but precise accent. "I am Frau Dr. Helena Richter. And this," she said, her gesture taking in the entire room, "is the Versteck station. The hidden ward. I assume you are with the American hospital upstairs." I just nodded, my mind reeling. A German doctor. A hidden ward full of German soldiers right under the noses of the US Army. This was treason. This was aiding the enemy. "You can't be here," I managed to say. You have enemy combatants here. I have to report this." A flicker of sadness, or perhaps frustration, crossed her face. Enemy combatants, she said softly, walking towards me. Look at them, Fraulein. Look closely. Her gaze was compelling. I let my eyes travel over the patients. The young soldier with the leg traction was clutching a small, worn photograph, his eyes closed. An old man in a nearby bed was coughing weakly into a cloth. In a bed further away, a woman who looked to be in her 30s was comforting a small child sleeping beside her. They were just people, broken, sick, scared people. These men are no longer combatants, Dr. Richter said, her voice low but firm. They are patients. As are these civilians. This hospital was overrun. Your orders were to treat only your own. What was I to do? Leave them to die in the streets? Abandon them when the shelling started? She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I took an oath, as I assume you did. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. Turning them out would be harm. My mind was a battleground. The soldier in me was shouting orders, secure the area, arrest this woman. But the nurse in me was looking at a teenage boy, his face pale, an empty sleeve where his right arm should be. He was someone's son. I thought of the letters I wrote for our boys. Did German mothers not weep for their sons just the same? I need to think, I stammered, taking a step back towards the staircase. Of course, Dr. Richter said, her demeanor softening. But know this, we are no threat to you. We have no weapons, we only have a desire to live. And we could use your help. Our supplies are limited. I didn't reply. I turned and fled back up the stairs, my heart pounding. I pushed the false shelf door closed behind me, my hands trembling. I stood in that dark storage closet, leaning against the wall, trying to catch my breath. What had I just discovered? A pocket of resistance? A humanitarian crisis? Both. I retrieved the blanket from my feverish patient from a different supply room, my actions automatic, my mind 1,000 miles away, or rather, just 20 feet below. For the rest of my shift, I moved like a ghost. I changed dressings, administered morphine, smiled at my patients, but all I could see were the faces from that hidden ward. The weary resolve in Dr. Richter's eyes. The innocence in the face of the one-armed boy. That night, in the small room I shared with 3 other nurses, I couldn't sleep. The sounds of snores and the occasional murmur from a nightmare-filled sleep from my roommates were a stark contrast to the silence I had felt downstairs. I lit a small candle and pulled out my diary. I had to write this down. I had to make a record in case something happened. April 12th, 1945. I have discovered something impossible. A secret world beneath our feet. A German doctor, a Frau Dr. Richter, is running a hidden ward in the basement of this very hospital. She has patients German soldiers, yes, but also civilians. An old man, a woman, and her child. She spoke of the Hippocratic Oath. She asked for my help. What do I do? Reporting them feels like signing a death warrant, but not reporting them is a court-martial offense. I am an officer in the United States Army. I have a duty, but to whom? To the regulations or to the people lying helpless in those beds? The world has gone mad up here, but down there, it seems there is still a small semblance of sanity, of mercy. God help me, I don't know the right answer. The next day, I found my feet carrying me back to the storage closet. I had stuffed my pockets with what I could spare. A roll of bandages, a few sulfa pills, a bar of soap. I told myself I was just going to look, to assess the situation more clearly. I told myself I was gathering intelligence. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie as soon as I pushed the hidden door open and descended the stairs. Dr. Richter was there, changing the dressing on the one-armed boy's stump. She looked up as I entered, and again, she showed no surprise. She simply gave me a small, tired nod. I am glad you came back, she said simply. I walked over to her, my nurse's instincts taking over. Let me help with that, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She moved aside without a word, and I took over. The boy, whose name I learned was Klaus, flinched as I cleaned the wound. It was clean, well cared for, but the trauma was severe. Is tut mir leid, I whispered. I'm sorry. His eyes, wide and blue, met mine, and he gave a tiny, brave nod. After I finished, I placed the roll of bandages and the sulfa pills on a small table beside a kerosene lamp. Dr. Richter watched me, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she said. These are a blessing. I can't promise anything regular, I said quickly, the soldier in me reasserting itself. And I can't get you major supplies, but I can help. A little, and so it began, my double life. By day, I was Captain Shepard, efficient, dedicated nurse to the American forces. I followed orders, I attended briefings, I laughed with the other nurses and flirted shyly with the junior doctors. But in stolen moments during my breaks, or late in the evening when my shift was over, I would become someone else. I would slip down to the Verstex station. I started bringing more things, a bit of extra food from my rations, more bandages. Some morphine syringes I managed to squirrel away from a dwindling supply, justifying it to myself as a necessary risk. I began to learn the patient's stories, not as the enemy, but as people. There was Herr Weber, the old man with the cough, a former history teacher who had lost his entire family in a bombing raid. He would sometimes, in a clear moment, tell me fragments of stories about old Berlin, his voice a thin, raspy thread of memory. There was Liesel, the woman with the child, a little boy named Peter. Her husband had been sent to the Eastern Front over a year ago, and she had not heard from him since. She had fled her apartment with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small loaf of bread when the shelling started in their neighborhood. Peter had a quiet, serious nature about him, and he would watch me with big, solemn eyes. And then there were the soldiers. Klaus, the boy I had first helped. He was 16. He'd been conscripted in the final, desperate Volkssturm, given a Panzerfaust and 2 days of training. He lost his arm to an American tank shell in a fight he didn't understand, for a cause he was too young to comprehend. He missed his mother and his dog, a dachshund named Fritz. There was another soldier, an older man named Ernst. He had a nasty chest wound that made breathing difficult. He had been a carpenter before the war, and he spoke little. But one afternoon, as I was helping him sit up to drink some water, he looked at me and said, in halting English, I have a son. In Hamburg, he is 7. I hope he does not see this. The raw, unvarnished fear in his eyes was not the face of a fanatical Nazi. It was the face of a father, terrified for his child's future. Dr. Richter was the steady, unwavering center of it all. She was a force of nature. She had been the chief attending physician at this very hospital before the war. When the Nazis came to power, she told me one evening over a cup of bitter ersatz coffee, she had been pressured to join the party. She refused. She kept her head down, did her work, and used her position to protect Jewish staff members for as long as she could. When the Americans came and the order was given to only treat Allied casualties, she made her choice. She and a few loyal orderlies, an older man named Franz, and a young timid woman named Greta, who had lost her fiancé at Stalingrad, had moved the most vulnerable patients here to an old sealed-off tuberculosis sanatorium that was part of the hospital's original foundation. We have enough food, barely, for another week, perhaps 2. She confided in me one day, her voice low. The medicines, we have almost nothing left for pain. And the infection, it is a constant battle. I looked around the ward. These people who had been abstract concepts of the enemy or collateral damage just weeks ago had become individuals to me. Liesel was teaching Peter his letters using a scrap of newspaper. Herr Weber was sharing his meager portion of soup with Klaus. They were a community, a tiny fragile lifeboat in a sea of ruin, and I was now their secret lifeline. My diary became my confessional. April 18th, 1945. I brought them a can of peaches today from my own rations. You would have thought I'd given them a chest of gold. Little Peter's face lit up like a Christmas tree. He'd never tasted a peach before. The simple, sweet juice running down his chin felt like a greater victory than any battle report. I am betraying my orders with every can, every bandage. I know this. But to see that small moment of joy in this hellscape, it feels more right than anything I've done in months. Dr. Richter calls me Schwester Eleanor now. Sister Eleanor, it feels. True. April 25th, 1945. The news from upstairs is electric. The Russians are pushing hard from the east. Our units are meeting them. The end is near, everyone says. There's a feeling of celebration in the air, but it's a nervous, jagged kind of joy. What does the end mean for the people downstairs? Liberation for us could be a death sentence for them. The Russians. The stories we hear are terrifying. And if our own MPs discover them, they'll be rounded up. The soldiers to POW camps, which are overflowing and brutal. The civilians, I don't even know. The fear in the hidden ward is palpable now. It's a different kind of fear than the fear of shells. It's the fear of what comes after. The tension was a physical presence, a tightness in my chest that never went away. I started taking greater risks. I managed to sneak an entire crate of serum albumin down the stairs, hidden under a pile of dirty linens. It was a desperate act. If I had been caught, there would have been no explanation. But I had seen 2 of the soldiers getting weaker, their bodies unable to fight infection without the basic proteins to rebuild. It was a calculated risk, and it paid off. But the close calls were becoming more frequent. One afternoon, as I was about to enter the storage closet, I heard voices inside, 2 of our engineers assessing the structural damage. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I waited, pressed against the wall around the corner, for what felt like an eternity until they left. That was too close. The secret was becoming more precarious with each passing day. The climax came on a day that began with a strange, heavy silence. The shelling, a constant companion for weeks, had stopped. The morning of April 30th was unnervingly quiet. The news rippled through the hospital in excited, hushed tones. Hitler was dead, by his own hand in his bunker. The word felt seismic. The war was truly, finally over. There were cheers, laughter, soldiers firing their rifles into the air in celebration. The mood upstairs was one of unbridled, triumphant relief. But as I made my way through the cheering crowds, my heart was a stone in my chest. I slipped away, down to the hidden ward. The atmosphere there was funereal. The patients huddled in their beds, their faces etched with a new, profound terror. Dr. Richter was standing in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, her face a pale, stoic mask. "They are saying the Fuhrer is dead," she said, her voice flat. "The Russians will be here in days, perhaps hours. The Americans will not stay. They will hand this sector over." She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine, undiluted fear in her eyes. "When they come, they will find this place. They will show no mercy, not to the soldiers, not to the women." The reality of the situation crashed down on me. My little missions of mercy, my stolen bandages and cans of peaches, were meaningless in the face of the Red Army's advance. I had been playing at being a savior, but now a real existential threat was bearing down on them, and I was powerless. "We have to get you out," I said, the idea forming even as I spoke it. "We have to move you west to the American lines." "Move them?" Dr. Richter gestured around the room. "Herr Weber cannot walk 10 steps without collapsing. Ernst has a punctured lung. How do you propose we move them, Schwester Eleanor? We have no vehicles, no petrol. To go into the streets is to be seen, to be—" She didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what happened to lone German soldiers and civilians on the streets of Berlin in those final days. There had to be a way. I couldn't let them just wait for the end, not after everything. I thought of Klaus, of Liesel, and little Peter. I thought of Herr Weber's stories and Ernst's quiet hope for his son. They weren't the enemy. They were the leftovers of a broken machine, the human wreckage. I have an idea, I said, my voice tight with a sudden, desperate resolve. It's a risk, a huge risk. But it's the only one we have. My plan was insane. It relied on luck, chaos, and a level of audacity that I didn't know I possessed. A celebration upstairs was our cover. With the news of Hitler's death, discipline was lax. Officers were drinking. There was a sense that the job was done. I was counting on that. I went to the motor pool. I found Sergeant Donnelly, a good-natured Texan who had always been friendly. "Sergeant," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "we've got a situation. We need to move some contaminated medical supplies. Stuff from the German stocks, infected bandages, that kind of thing. Command wants it taken to the dump site west of the city immediately, before it causes an outbreak. They've given me the chit." I handed him a piece of paper. It was a real requisition form, but I had forged the signature, copying the scrawl of our commanding officer from a memo I'd seen. My hand had shaken the entire time. Donnelly squinted at the form, then at the 2 deuce-and-a-half trucks I was requesting. "Now, Captain, we're kind of celebrating the end of the war here." "I know, Sergeant," I said, forcing a smile. "And I'm sorry, but you know how the brass is, an ounce of prevention. I'll make it up to you. I'll even drive one of the trucks myself if you can spare a driver for the other." I was pushing it. I was a nurse, not a truck driver. He looked at the form again, then shrugged. What the hell? War's over, right? Jimmy, Hank. He yelled to 2 of his men. "Get the 2 deuces fueled up. The captain here has a garbage run." My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. The first part was done. Now for the impossible part. I rushed back to the hidden ward. "We have 2 trucks," I told Dr. Richter, my words tumbling out in a rush. "But we have maybe an hour tops. We need to get everyone who can walk to the loading bay at the back of the main building. The ones who can't will need stretchers." The next 45 minutes were a blur of frantic, hushed activity. Franz and Greta, along with Dr. Richter and myself, began moving patients. We used the hidden staircase, but we had to emerge into a main corridor to get to the rear loading dock. It was the most dangerous part. Every sound echoed. Every shadow felt like a threat. We moved in small groups, supporting those who could hobble, carrying those who could not. Liesel carried Peter, her face a mask of terror. Klaus, pale and sweating, walked bravely, leaning heavily on Franz. We got the first group to the loading bay, a dark, cavernous space that smelled of oil and old hay. I hid them behind stacks of empty crates. My uniform was my best weapon now. If anyone questioned me, I was just following orders. We made trip after trip. Herr Weber was the most difficult. He was so frail. Ernst, the carpenter, insisted on walking, his face gray with pain, each breath a ragged gasp. Finally, we had them all. 23 souls, huddled in the dark, their eyes wide with fear and a flicker of impossible hope. I looked at my watch. We were behind schedule. Where were the trucks? Just as panic was beginning to claw its way up my throat, I heard the glorious, grinding roar of engines. The 2 large trucks rumbled into the loading bay, their headlights cutting through the gloom. Jimmy and Hank jumped out of the cabs. "All right, Captain, where's the—" Jimmy stopped short, his eyes widening as he saw the crowd of German civilians and soldiers emerging from behind the crates. Captain, what's this?" This was the moment, the point of no return. I walked up to them, my posture straight, my voice as authoritative as I could make it. "Change of plans, boys. These are displaced persons, high priority extraction. Orders from command. It's all on the down low. You know how it is." I tapped the side of my nose, hoping I looked like I was in on some great secret. Jimmy and Hank looked at each other, skepticism all over their faces. Displaced persons? Hank said, his eyes lingering on Klaus's empty sleeve and tattered uniform. That one looks like a Kraut soldier to me, ma'am. My mind raced. He's a valuable asset, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Intelligence. Look, the form is signed. This is a direct order. We don't have time to debate this. The Russians are hours away. Do you want to be responsible for compromising a sensitive intelligence operation? I was bluffing on a staggering scale. I was using their fear of the Russians and their ingrained respect for the chain of command. The two drivers looked at each other again, a silent conversation passing between them. The war was over. They wanted to go home. They didn't want trouble. Finally, Jimmy shrugged. All right, Captain, your shell. Let's load him up. It was the most beautiful sentence I had ever heard. We worked quickly, loading the patients into the backs of the trucks, covering them with tarpaulins we found in the bay. It was uncomfortable and dark, but it was safety. It was a chance. Dr. Richter, Franz, and Greta climbed into the back of one truck to care for the patients during the journey. I would drive the lead truck with Jimmy as my co-driver. Hank would follow. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel to stop them from shaking. Jimmy got in beside me. Where to, Captain? He asked. Just head west, I said. Follow the main road out of the city. I have coordinates, but I can't disclose them until we're clear. Another lie. I had no coordinates. I had no plan beyond getting them out of Berlin. We rumbled out of the loading bay and into the Berlin night. The city was a landscape of shadows and ruin, lit by occasional fires. The streets were chaotic, filled with jubilant American and British soldiers, but also with desperate German civilians trying to flee west. Our trucks joined a slow, sad river of humanity flowing away from the advancing Eastern Front. We drove for what felt like an eternity. I navigated by instinct and the position of the moon, always heading away from the rising sun. After a few hours, we passed through the outer suburbs and into the countryside. The destruction lessened. There were fields and trees. The air began to smell of earth and spring instead of smoke and death. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky soft pink and gold, I saw a sign for a small village that was supposed to be in the British zone of control. It was as good a place as any. I pulled the truck over onto a quiet lane surrounded by pine trees. Hank pulled in behind me. I jumped out and went to the back of my truck, pulling back the tarp. 23 pairs of exhausted, hopeful eyes looked back at me. Dr. Richter climbed down, her movements stiff. She looked around at the peaceful, wooded lane, the birds beginning to sing their morning songs. She looked back at me, and her stern composure finally broke. Tears welled in her clear blue eyes. Schwester Eleanor, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. You have given them their lives. We helped them all down. They stood on the grassy verge, blinking in the early morning light, breathing the clean air. They were free. They were safe. Liesel held a sleeping Peter in her arms, tears streaming silently down her face. Klaus leaned against a tree, a faint, real smile on his face for the first time. Herr Weber sat on a stump, just looking at the sky. I walked over to Jimmy and Hank. The operation is complete, I said, my voice hoarse. You are to return to base. You never saw this. You never transported anyone. This never happened. Is that understood? They looked at the group of refugees, then back at me. They knew. Of course they knew. But the war was over. Jimmy gave me a slow, respectful nod. Understood, Captain. Never happened. They got back into their trucks, turned them around, and drove back towards Berlin. I watched their taillights disappear over a hill. I was alone. I had done it. I had committed a court-martial offense of monumental proportions, and I had never felt more right in my entire life. I walked back to the group. Dr. Richter approached me. You are not coming with us? She asked. I shook my head. I have to go back. My war is over, but my duty isn't. I have patients who need me. I looked at the faces of the people I had saved. You'll be okay here. Find the British. Tell them you're refugees. They'll help you. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rest of my rations, a few chocolate bars, some crackers, and pressed them into Dr. Richter's hands. Then, on an impulse, I hugged her. This stern, indomitable German doctor. She hugged me back, tightly. Thank you, Schwester Eleanor, she said again. I will never forget you. I said my goodbyes, a lump in my throat. I patted Klaus on his good shoulder. I smiled at Liesel and little Peter. I nodded to Ernst and Herr Weber. Then I turned and started walking back down the road, towards Berlin, towards whatever came next. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I carried them with me. The walk back was long and quiet. The sun was fully up now, warming the cool spring air. The birdsong was relentless, a cheerful, oblivious chorus to the end of the world. My mind was strangely empty, a calm, still pool after a raging storm. I had no regrets, only a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I slipped back into the hospital just as the morning shift was beginning. The celebration from the night before had given way to a hungover, weary normalcy. No one noticed my absence. No one questioned me. I was just Captain Shepard, back for another day's work. I went to my room, changed my uniform, and went to my ward. The smells, the sounds, the familiar faces of my boys, it was all the same, but I was different. The walls inside me were gone. A few days later, on May 2nd, the Soviet Red Army fully occupied Berlin. Our hospital was ordered to pack up and prepared to move west, back to American lines. As we loaded our equipment and patients onto trucks, I took one last long look at the main building. I thought of the hidden staircase, the empty ward below. It was just a memory now, a secret I would carry forever. The war in Europe ended officially on May 8th, 1945, VE Day. The celebrations in London and New York were legendary. I was back in a reassignment camp in France by then, waiting for transport home. I watched the sailors and soldiers celebrating, and I felt a quiet joy for them, but my own heart was quiet. It had seen too much. I never told anyone about the Versteck station. Not my fellow nurses, not the officers who debriefed us, not my family when I finally returned to the green hills of Vermont in the fall of 1945. It was my secret, a sacred trust. I kept my diary, though. The pages from those weeks in Berlin are worn soft from being read and reread. It is my proof that it was real, that in the midst of absolute darkness, a small group of people, on both sides of a terrible conflict, chose compassion. They chose life. I became a nurse back in my hometown, working at the local hospital until I retired. I married a kind man who had been a teacher, not a soldier. We had children and then grandchildren. I lived a quiet, normal life. But sometimes, on a cool spring evening when the smell of rain on concrete is just right, I am transported back. I see Dr. Richter's steady blue eyes. I hear Klaus's shy thank you. I see little Peter's face smeared with peach juice. I often wonder what happened to them. Did Herr Weber ever tell his stories again? Did Ernst make it back to his son in Hamburg? Did Liesel find her husband? I like to think they did. I like to think they built new lives from the rubble, that they found a measure of the peace they so deserved. The world moved on. The Cold War began. Berlin was divided, then the wall fell. History books were written, documentaries were made. They tell the stories of the great battles, the generals, the politicians. But they don't tell the story of the hidden ward. They don't tell the stories of the small, quiet acts of courage that leave no monument, win no medals, but which, in their own way, are the only things that truly mend a broken world. I am an old woman now. My hands, which once changed so many bandages, are gnarled with arthritis. But when I close my eyes, I am there again. Not in the chaos of the main hospital, but in the quiet, lamplit stillness of the room below, the smell of antiseptic and soup, the sound of a soft-spoken German lullaby. The feeling of a fragile human connection forged not in spite of the war, but because of it. We were not heroes. We were just people. A German doctor, a few orderlies, an American nurse, and a ward full of broken souls. We did what we had to do. We preserved a tiny, flickering flame in the overwhelming darkness, and in the end, that flame was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. So that is my story, the one not in the history books, the one I carried with me for a lifetime. I offer it to you now, not as a tale of war, but as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. A reminder that even when the world tells you to build walls, it is never, ever wrong to open a door. To see the person, not the uniform. To choose to be a sister, a helper, a friend. To choose, always, to care. The night is quiet now. The memories have settled, soft as dust. The hidden ward is silent, its story safe at last. And here, in the peace of a long life lived, I can finally rest.